Assalamu alaikum everyone. Here's my quick review of 11 great points that Shaykh Hamza Yusuf nailed in his interview with Dr. Jordan Peterson, and my reasons for why I think these were really good points.
I have two sides of the family. One were Irish Catholics, and then my mother was half Irish, half Greek. So my Greek grandfather, who was an archon in the Greek Orthodox Church, he actually had that influence on us. So we were actually raised in his church. But my mother was, she was actually, would have considered herself a Buddhist most of my upbringing. And her mother, who was an Irish woman, and her brother, my great uncle, were from Georgia, and they actually were interested in Buddhism in the 1920s and moved out to San Francisco. And my great uncle, George Fields, opened Fields Bookstore, which was the first metaphysical bookstore on the West Coast.
Speaking about his Irish Catholic and Greek Orthodox mixed background, along with the fact that his great uncle George Fields started the Fields Metaphysics Bookstore, this is extremely important because what Shaykh Hamza has done here is he's established the Ya Qawmi principle. He's established the spirit of Ya Qawmi. All of the prophets, or nearly all of the prophets in the Qur'an, always spoke to their communities by addressing them as Ya Qawmi, O my people, O my people. In other words, I'm one of you. You know me. I'm not so different than you. I'm not alien to you. I'm not from some different culture. I speak your language. I know your culture. By speaking about his mixed Christian roots, Shaykh Hamza is establishing that not only he, but his family as well is firmly established and embedded in the Western Judeo-Christian tradition. At the same time, he mentions the fact that his mother spent most of her life as a Buddhist. Don't underestimate the importance of him including this fact. Keep in mind that nowadays there are so many Americans, so many Canadians who in their spiritual quest, they will skip over the Middle East and go directly to the East for spiritual guidance. So they find Buddhism and its associated yoga, meditation, all of that stuff. They take that from the East, they just skip over the Middle East, they skip over Islam. And so by mentioning that his mother spent most of her life as a Buddhist, Shaykh Hamza is basically indirectly, politely saying that I've been there, done that, I've experienced that, but I found something better. Now, most of us amateur du'at can't establish that in the same way that Shaykh Hamza Yusuf can, being from the same Western civilization. However, on whatever level, we should try to establish some kind of cultural affinity with the people that we're talking to. That doesn't have to be on a high intellectual level. It could be talking about the video games that you grew up playing. It could be about the TV shows that you grew up watching, but establishing some kind of cultural point of contact, some kind of cultural affinity is very important before we start sharing the message of Islam with people.
So when you were a kid and you were going to services, can you remember well enough to characterize your beliefs at that time? I mean, I started having trouble with the ideas in Christianity, I guess, when I was probably around 12. So I'm wondering what your reaction was as a thinker that young.
I mean, I really loved the Greek service. I loved the frankincense. They had great, these chants that were quite beautiful. And it was very ritualistic, and I enjoyed it. I had no problem going to church.
I really like the way that Shaykh Hamza handled this question. He could have taken the bait, or maybe I shouldn't call it bait. He could have taken this opportunity to critique Christian theology. And he's more than capable of doing that. Some of us sitting on the sidelines might have been hoping, yeah, now he's going to rip into the Trinity. Now he's going to rip into the idea of the divine sonship of Jesus. But Shaykh Hamza wisely doesn't take that course of action. Had he started his interview with a critique of Christian theology, he might have lost the Christian audience, and that too right in the first 5 minutes. Instead, he takes a different direction. He kind of glosses over the theology of the Greek Orthodox Church, and he says, well, I enjoyed the rituals. I enjoyed some of the ritualistic practices in the church. And that makes sense, and it sounds genuine, because at that point in his life, these rituals would have been perhaps the only rituals that helped to connect him with something higher, with the divine, with God. As for the Christian theology, he kind of leaves that ambiguous. Was he uncomfortable with the idea of the Trinity at this point as a youth when he was in the Greek Orthodox Church? Did he accept it? Did he not accept it? Was he like one of those non-believing yoga practitioners in the West who just do the exercises, but they don't necessarily believe in all of the Hindu, Buddhist, meditative aspects that are connected with the yoga? He leaves that open.
But my mother did expose us to a lot of different faith traditions. She actually took me, we went to synagogues, we went to Buddhist sanghais, we went to different Christian iterations. She also took me to a mosque when I was 12 years old in Redwood City. And she was of the belief that much of religion is this interesting where you're born and where you're brought up, and that's going to determine and color the way you view the world. And so she had this idea that religions, that it's very dangerous to assume just because you were born into something that that's the end all of truth. And so she was eclectic in that way.
This, I think, was an extremely important segment of the interview because this is a question or an objection that we hear from atheists and agnostics in the West all the time and time again. And that objection is that, is your religious affiliation not just a geographical coincidence? Is it not the case that had you been born in China 200 years ago, you probably would have been Buddhist? So religion is just intertwined completely with culture. It's inseparable. We just follow the religion of our family, of our parents, of our society. Shaykh Hamza challenges this simplistic notion and says, it is to some extent about where you were born. However, that can be remedied. And he references the example of his mother who took him when he was young to different places of worship. So he was exposed to different religious ideas. He was exposed to different philosophies. And so I think indirectly Shaykh Hamza is letting Jordan Peterson's audience know that you too can research. You too can search. There's nothing actually stopping you from looking for the truth, for searching beyond your own cultural boundaries. He also quotes his mother as saying that just because you're born into something doesn't mean that it's the end all of truth. For the discerning viewer, I think they'll realize that Shaykh Hamza here has effectively turned the table, because this question can be counterposed to the atheist or to the agnostic as well. Are you just an atheist because you were born in a cynical age, in a skeptical, non-believing, irreligious age? Are you just a nominal lapsed Catholic because most of your Catholic friends are also nominal lapsed Catholics who don't take Catholicism very seriously? In other words, this objection that non-religious people pose towards religious people can be turned around and it can be posed to non-religious people as well. Don't you agnostics find it curious that most of your friends probably are agnostic as well? Don't you atheists find it curious that most of your friends are probably atheist and or agnostic as well?
And the Qur'an, one of the hallmarks of a believer is gratefulness, gratitude. In fact, the word in Arabic for disbeliever means ungrateful, an ingrate.
I like this point very well because, of course, Shaykh Hamza does not deny the technical fiqhi meaning of kafir as a non-believer or as a non-Muslim, but he gets at the etymological root of what this word originally means, which is one who covers blessings, an ingrate, someone who is ungrateful, someone who is unthankful. And yes, indeed, we are born in debt. All of us were born with the gift of life. I have 2 eyes, I have a tongue that I'm speaking with, I have kidneys, I have a liver, I have a heart. I'm not the one that programmed these things to work. When I'm sleeping, my heart is still beating. My kidneys are still doing their work. My lungs are still doing their work. How exactly does that work? Before I slept, I didn't plug my heart into a USB port to recharge it, to make sure that it doesn't die, that it doesn't stop working during the middle of the night. So all of us humans are born with a sense of indebtedness, and to not be able to know who or what to thank is something unfortunate indeed. Oftentimes on the news we hear about people who just narrowly escape death, and they're thankful in some kind of generic, abstract way, like, oh, I'm very thankful, I was very lucky, etc. But when you don't have an object of that gratitude to direct your thanks towards, it leaves a great feeling of unfulfillment in the human heart. I want you to imagine if someone was paying your monthly bills. Every month somebody was paying your bills, but he or she never disclosed their identity. If you're a decent person, if you're a grateful person by nature, you want to show gratitude, you would want to uncover, you would want to find out the identity of that person, who he or she is, so that you can thank them. At least once in your life, you could thank them. Thank you for paying my monthly bills. Thank you for doing this. I think on a subconscious level, Shaykh Hamza exploring the meaning of kafir as an ingrate is very important, because nowadays, there's many irreligious people, there's many atheists who are happy to be labeled as disbelievers. They'll be happy to be labeled as kuffar. There's arrogant people, atheists in the US, they sell t-shirts that say, I'm a proud kafir, I'm a proud disbeliever. So they will cynically laugh and scoff at that, and they'll be happy to be called a disbeliever. But how many people would be happy to be called ungrateful, unthankful? Who would happily wear that badge with pride and say, yes, I'm ungrateful? So by exploring this etymological root of the meaning of the word kafir, I think that's going to cause many more people to reflect and think about where they stand in life.
There's many verses in the Qur'an that talk about that we have raised some of you over others in privilege as a test to show who will be the best in action. What are you going to do with those privileges? How are you going to respond to those tribulations? So if you have a worldview that actually incorporates all of the problems in the world and gives them meaning, then it enables people to look at them in a very different way. Whereas if you remove that, you're stuck with just Marxist resentment and anger and envy.
I don't think this was a coincidence. I don't think it was a mistake that Shaykh Hamza used the term Marxist here. Marxist resentment. He's very aware of that, to a large extent, elitist, educated, right-wing, white, conservative audience that Jordan Peterson speaks to. And that audience is obviously not a fan of socialism or Marxism, whether it's economic Marxism or cultural Marxism. So by explaining that Islam has not only a solution to Marxist resentment, but that it can prevent Marxist resentment, because Islam provides a worldview, a paradigm in which we can make spiritual sense of the fact that there are different socio-economic classes, and there always will be. There will never be a classless utopian society. All the communist experiments in history that tried to achieve that ended up achieving a hell on earth, a nightmare. At the same time, Islam doesn't make us complacent about poverty, and it doesn't glorify poverty, and it commands Muslims to pay the zakat to help alleviate the effects of poverty, and it strongly encourages us to give sadaqah, voluntary charity, to help those people who are less fortunate than us.
Maybe we can snap ourselves into a psychophysiological state where we're 100 times faster than we would normally be for some very finite amount of time. And I'm not trying to, what would you say, reduce this to a physiological explanation.
Well, that's a very common reductionist approach.
Yeah. Well,
an experience that, I mean, you can look at the hard drive aspect of it, but the software is the mystery.
Yeah, I'm definitely not trying to remove the phenomenological significance, because that would be foolish. And
even those explanations are only attempts at understanding phenomenon that we really don't have access to, because cause and effect is a very difficult thing to nail down.
It certainly is, yeah. And that kind of explanation doesn't account for all the near-death experience phenomena either. But
I mean, you asked me how, that got me thinking a lot about death.
Right.
Irrespective of whatever the neurochemical phenomena that were happening within my body, that experience, that phenomenological experience had a existential effect on me.
So what's happening here is this followed after Jordan Peterson had asked Shaykh Hamza to share his near-death experience, what he had seen and experienced after his near-fatal car crash, and how that changed his worldview. And Shaykh Hamza gave an account of that. But then for some reason, Dr. Peterson went on a strange tangent, and he started giving a scientific, neurophysiological explanation for the experience that Shaykh Hamza had when he had that near-death incident. And that could have undermined the reality or the validity of the experience that Shaykh Hamza had. So Shaykh Hamza here very wisely, I think, kind of cut Dr. Peterson off and said that, well, the phenomenological experience is real. That's what you asked me about. So I'm explaining what I experienced and how that set me on the search for truth. I don't think Dr. Peterson was purposely trying to invalidate Shaykh Hamza's experience in any way, especially since he did a very reasonable and fair interview of Hamza Yusuf. However, Shaykh Hamza did the wise thing by continuing to talk about his experience. And again, don't underestimate the importance of this for a Western audience. Western audiences, Western people are hungry for spiritual experiences. Being cut off from the church, being cut off from Christian worship and prayer, they're hungry for something. That's what takes them on their search to the East. That's what gets them smoking weed and drinking alcohol. They are hungry for that kind of experience. And so Shaykh Hamza sharing his experience is very, very important. At the same time, he doesn't make that the main pivotal point that explains his conversion to Islam. So he doesn't go that kind of evangelical Christian route where it's often just about a vision. You know, Jesus spoke to me. Jesus came and told me that I'm saved. Shaykh Hamza doesn't do that. He presents this near-death experience that he had as the pivotal point that started him on his search for truth. And that eventually led to Islam. And this connects to the next point where Shaykh Hamza speaks a little bit about death and about our mortality.
Right. It was very powerful. And I decided that I really wanted to know if I could have died in that moment, which was very possible. I wanted to know what if anything happens, and if something happens, how do you prepare for that? Like what, you know, if we're genuinely on the doors of infinity, then we should take this time that we have very seriously to prepare to go through that door. And that's what, existentially, that's what happened to me. I wanted to know if I can go through that door at any moment. As a 17-year-old, I could have done it. Now, as a 64-year-old, it's possible that I could do it today or tomorrow or the next day. What type of preparation do I need?
This is extremely, extremely important in our dawah because our mortality, the fact that we're going to die, is something that cannot be rejected. It cannot be denied by anyone. You can't refute it. You can't do a video refutation for it. The atheist can't do it. The Christian can't do it. The Jew, the Muslim, the Hindu, we all collectively agree. We all know that we're going to face death. And so if we're all going to die, we need to take some time out to reflect on the fact of our death and what might lie in wait for us after death. As Shaykh Hamza puts it very well, if we're all going to have to pass through that door to infinity, it makes sense that we should prepare for it. And this is where his mentioning of his near-death experience is very, very relevant, because the wise person, the intelligent person, learns from other people's mistakes and or experiences. All of us, we shouldn't have to wait until we have a near-death experience before we start reflecting on these important issues in life. We shouldn't have to wait until we have a near-death, near-fatal car crash before we start thinking about what is the higher moral and spiritual purpose of life. What is my stance on the great existential questions and issues that all of us as humans have to face? As the Qur'an says, "Kullu nafsin dha'iqatul maut." Every soul will taste death.
I was once in a hotel and in London, and there was a guy across from me reading the Qur'an, an English translation, and drinking a Heineken beer, which was very interesting. And so I was dressed in Western clothes, and I just asked him, "How are you finding that book?" He said, "This book is very interesting." And I said, "In what way?" And he said, "It's just tension release, tension release." I said, wow, you got that on the first reading. That's very impressive.
I really enjoyed this clip. I liked this whole tension and release phrase, and that's probably something that I will adopt and use in my future conversations with non-Muslims when talking about the Qur'an. I in the past would have described this same phenomenon as a kind of balance in the Qur'an, meaning that the Qur'an will give you a scary description of hell and talk about the punishments of hell, and so you're tense. But then it will immediately follow that by a description of paradise. And it'll say, well, here is what awaits those who do good. Here's what awaits those who have faith. So this fellow that Shaykh Hamza quoted put it very well. It's a tension and release, tension and release. And I think it's very important that in this clip here, Shaykh Hamza is not quoting Imam Ghazali. He's not quoting At-Tabari. He's not quoting Imam Suyuti. Here he's just quoting some normal American Joe who's reading an English translation of the Qur'an in one hand and he has a bottle of beer in his other hand. Subliminally, the message that is getting across to the audience here is that if this normal, regular American Joe with a beer in his hand, if he can get it, if he can understand it, if he can benefit from the message of the Qur'an, so can you, Jordan Peterson, and so can everyone. Every person can benefit from the teachings of the Qur'an. Shaykh Hamza's example here, I think, also indirectly speaks to the fact of the objection that many Westerners and many liberals nowadays have to the reality of hell and why hell should exist. So in this very small example that Shaykh Hamza has given, he's given an example of someone who has basically embraced that tension release dynamic of the Qur'an. He's embraced this balance, because this balance, this tension release dynamic, at the end of the day, helps to keep our attention and helps to keep us in check. It's in line with the basic human psychology, which needs the carrot and the stick. It needs promises of rewards, it needs incentives, but it also needs deterrence.
And also, I'm interested in, again, why you found the Islamic tradition preferable, let's say, to the Orthodox tradition, that you did enjoy the rituals that were part of that, at least. So let's deal with practical issues first. So
the tradition itself, what struck me was, one, I got to keep all of the prophets that I believed in already. And I added, in addition, what we consider to be the final prophet. And just as very often Christians marvel at how Jews miss Jesus, Muslims also marvel at how Christians and Jews miss Muhammad. Although, to be fair to the Jews, they do acknowledge the prophet as a providential force.
MashaAllah, Shaykh Hamza handled this very well. He very beautifully outlines how Islam allowed him to retain his belief in all of the prophets of God, in all of the prophets that are mentioned previously in the Judeo-Christian dispensation. I think this also connects with a theme that is there throughout the interview, where Shaykh Hamza is perhaps not describing his conversion so much as a conversion as much as a growth, as much as a process of growth and evolution. He still believes in Abraham and Moses and Jesus, but now he also accepts Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. On a subconscious level, this is very important, because when we tell people to change, and at one point Shaykh Hamza does, but generally when we tell people to change, people don't really want to change when they're told to change. People don't want to convert, but almost everyone wants to grow. Almost everyone wants to progress. Almost everybody wants to evolve. Almost everybody wants to expand their thinking and their knowledge. So especially for Jews and Christians, I think Islam can be framed in that way.
He says in there, but you don't need a koan to do that. Just ask an educated Western person what they think about Islam, and they'll start expressing all of these prejudices. And if you ask them, have you ever read the Qur'an? No. Do you know anything about the Prophet Muhammad? No. Other than maybe something they read in a newspaper article or in Time or Newsweek or the Atlantic Monthly, something like that.
Yeah, well, it's not an easy thing to try to get a toehold in a different tradition, especially when you don't even have a toehold in your own.
Yeah, it's not that hard, especially for an educated person. You're obviously a highly educated person. It's not that hard. Islam, one of the things Gibbon said is that Islam spread because it was a very easy religion to understand. So this idea that I can't understand it, I'm having a hard time, it's not that hard to understand. I mean, Islam is actually very straightforward.
This was excellent how Shaykh Hamza outlined that Islam in its essence is a simple religion. It's not all that complicated. God is one. One is one in every language. In Chinese, in Hebrew, in Japanese, in English, and in Arabic, one is one. I also feel that this segment was kind of a gentle rebuke to Dr. Jordan Peterson, because as some of you know, in the past, Dr. Jordan Peterson had called the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, a warlord. I'm not sure if he intended that in a derogatory way, but it was definitely taken in a derogatory manner by Muslims. And he was of course corrected on that very effectively by brother Muhammad Hijab, may Allah bless him. Muhammad Hijab said, what about this Western hero? What about this Western hero? Do you call him a warlord as well? What about this Western hero? What about this Western hero? Why don't you call them warlords as well? And as a result, of course, Jordan Peterson retracted that comment, and he said something to the effect of, perhaps that statement, that comment of mine was not judicious, or it was less than judicious, or something like that. So it makes sense that Shaykh Hamza doesn't have to explicitly bring that up. You don't kick somebody while they're down. But I do think that this preceding clip was a gentle rebuke to Jordan Peterson and like-minded people, much of his audience, which is that, look, you might be educated in the Western canon, you might be educated in your field, but if you're not properly educated in Islam, then is it not a sign of arrogance to start pronouncing generalizations and judgments about a religion that you don't really know about?
And modern psychology attempts to give them, the anti-Christic formula is to say, unlike Christ who said, go and sin no more, the anti-Christic formula is to say, go and there's no more sin. So I'm just going to remove that bag of bricks that you're carrying around.
This was one of my favorite moments in the interview as well too. I really liked this witty statement. I don't know if it's a witty remark that Shaykh Hamza has made up or whether he adopted or borrowed this from somewhere else, but I really like it. Christ in the gospel says, go and sin no more. But the modern anti-Christic formula is, go, there is no more sin. Considering the limited amount of time that Shaykh Hamza had in this interview, I think he very powerfully addressed many issues and questions that a Western audience and that Jordan Peterson audience would have on their mind. Is it not a common question or a common objection from the atheist and agnostic and deist side that, I can be good without God? Like, why do I need God to be moral? Why do I need religion to be good? And if you reflect on this segment, I think Shaykh Hamza has indirectly addressed that point. If modern society doesn't consider sin to be sin anymore, then of course, you don't need the church, you don't need Islam, you don't need any religion to be good, because your definition of good is a pretty low standard, it's a pretty low bar. As long as you avoid 2 or 3 things, don't murder anybody and don't rape anybody, and then guess what? By default, you're a good person, you're good to go. So on that modern irreligious worldview, yes, of course, you don't have to be religious to avoid evil, because there's so many things you just don't consider to be evil anymore. Homosexuality, that's not evil. Fornication, well, that's not evil. Being rude to your elderly parents, that's not evil. Not praying, obviously, that's not evil. Transgenderism, that's not evil. Legalization of weed, alcohol, these things aren't evil. So yes, on an irreligious worldview, of course, yes, it's very easy to be good. But by God's standard, by the standards of the Creator and the laws that He has revealed, it's a whole different story. It is going to take us some effort, and it is going to take us some serious discipline to be good in the eyes of God. In summary, I think the interview went very well. I hope and pray that this conversation between Shaykh Hamza Yusuf and Dr. Jordan Peterson will serve as a bridge and a contact point for many educated Westerners who otherwise would not have investigated Islam or thought about Islam or listened to a lecture or a talk on Islam for 1+ hours. Jazakallah for watching this review. Please remember to like, remember to subscribe, and please also leave your comments down below. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.